The dust from the construction site had settled into every crevice of my Ford F-150, coating the dashboard in a fine gray powder that no amount of wiping could fully remove. My hands ached as I gripped the steering wheel, tendons screaming after 10 hours of supervising concrete pours and checking structural integrity on the Morrison renovation. The late afternoon sun slanted through the cracked windshield, highlighting every scratch, every worn surface of this truck that had been my constant companion for the past 5 years. My phone buzzed against the cup holder. A text from Miles. "Mom, don't watch Aunt Marjorie's story." Of course, I opened Instagram immediately. The video loaded on my cracked screen, the cheerful opening bars of some pop song playing as my sister Marjorie swept into frame. She wore a Ralph Lauren silk dress in cream, the kind that cost more than my monthly truck payment, and her highlighted hair caught the light as she gestured expansively at the lake house. My lake house. The one where I'd spent every childhood summer, where I'd carved my initials into the dock post, where I'd dreamed of bringing my own children one day. "Welcome to our little lakeside paradise." Marjorie's voice had that airy, performative quality she used for social media. "I'm giving you all an exclusive tour of our family estate." I watched her glide through rooms I knew by heart, the great room with its stone fireplace, the kitchen with the farmhouse sink. Then she reached the hallway leading to the bedrooms, and my stomach clenched. "And this," she said, pushing open a door, "used to be my sister's childhood bedroom, but we turned it into extra storage because the house just has so much space. It's a waste to leave rooms empty." The camera panned across what had once been my sanctuary. The window seat where I'd read books was buried under cardboard boxes. The closet where I'd hidden my architecture sketches stood open, revealing neat rows of Callaway golf clubs, Everett's collection, at least $15,000 worth of titanium and carbon fiber. Winter coats hung on a rolling rack. Ski equipment leaned against the wall where my bed had been. "Everett's golf gallery," Marjorie laughed, running her hand along a driver. "It's perfect for all his toys." The video continued, but I'd stopped watching. My vision had narrowed to a tunnel. The phone felt slippery in my sweaty palm. I didn't cry. Instead, nausea rose from the pit of my stomach in a hot wave. My hands found the steering wheel again, gripping until my knuckles blanched white. The sadness I'd expected didn't come. In its place, a cold, sharp anger that felt almost surgical in its precision. This wasn't new. I'd been the afterthought my entire life. But there was something about seeing it broadcast to 2,000 followers, seeing my childhood literally reduced to a storage space, that finally snapped something inside me. The memory came unbidden. Eliza's 9th birthday, 2 years ago. We'd sat at my small kitchen table, my daughter and I, watching the candles on her grocery store cake melt into the frosting. I'd called my mother 3 times. When she finally answered, Beatrice's voice had been distracted, annoyed. "Virginia, I can't talk right now. Marjorie just picked up her new Mercedes, and I'm helping her register it at the DMV. It's Eliza's birthday, Mom. You promised you'd call her." "There's a birthday every year, Virginia. Don't be dramatic." The line had gone dead. Eliza had blown out her candles alone, and I'd told her Grandma was stuck in traffic. My daughter had believed me because she was 9 and sweet, and hadn't yet learned that some people simply don't make room for you in their lives. That was my fatal flaw, I realize now, sitting in this dusty truck with my sister's voice still echoing from my phone. I kept believing that if I was good enough, obedient enough, hardworking enough, compliant enough, my mother would finally see me, love me, save me a room in the family home. My submissiveness hadn't earned me love, it had earned me contempt. I started the truck, the engine turning over with a reluctant growl. But I didn't drive home to the small rental house I shared with Miles and Eliza. Instead, I turned north, toward the mountains, letting muscle memory guide me along roads I'd driven 100 times for site inspections. 45 minutes later, I pulled through the broken gates of the Hawthorne estate. The building loomed against the darkening sky, a roaring 20s masterpiece that had been left to rot after the last owner's death 3 years ago. I'd driven past it dozens of times, had even walked the perimeter once with my surveyor's eye, cataloging its bones, hand-carved corbels, original slate roof damaged but salvageable, wraparound porch with intact spindlework, the kind of property that made preservation architects like me weak in the knees. It was also in foreclosure. The bank had been trying to unload it for 18 months with no takers. Too remote, Too expensive to restore. Too much work. I stood before those rusted gates in the gathering dark, my breath fogging in the October air. 50 acres. 18 rooms. A ballroom with parquet floors. A commercial kitchen that just needed new appliances and proper ventilation. My phone was in my hand before I'd consciously decided to make the call. Caleb? It's Virginia, my cousin answered on the second ring, and I could hear the sounds of his workshop in the background, the whine of a table saw cutting through pine. Do you still have that bank broker's number? The one who handled the Morrison foreclosure? Yeah, why? I want to bid on the Hawthorne estate, right now, tonight. There was a pause. Then, you're serious? Dead serious. That place is a money pit, Virginia. It'll take years to restore. I looked up at the sagging roofline, the broken windows reflecting the last of the daylight. I know. I've counted every rotted board. I've measured every square foot. And I know exactly what it could be. What changed? Caleb's voice was careful, the way you talk to someone standing on a ledge. Everything, I said. Send me that number. The auction happened 3 days later in a sterile conference room that smelled of old coffee and desperation. 7 bidders showed up. 6 left disappointed. I won the Hawthorne estate for $340,000 a steal, considering the land alone was worth twice that. The bank officer who handed me the paperwork looked almost apologetic. You know what you're getting into? He asked. I signed my name on the LLC documents I'd filed that morning. Phoenix Preservation, LLC. Not my personal name. Not something my family could easily trace back to me if they went looking. I'm a preservation architect, I told him. This is what I do. What I didn't tell him, I'd liquidated my retirement account, taken out an SBA loan that made my accountant wince, applied for every historic preservation grant I could find. The total came to $1.2 million in capital, barely enough, if I was careful, and if I was willing to do most of the work myself. I was. The real work began the very next morning. Caleb and I stood in the great hall, our breath visible in the November air. The temperature had already dropped to 20 degrees overnight, and winter in the High Peaks region was just getting started. Where do we start? He asked, his tool belt slung over his shoulder. I pulled out the project timeline I'd been working on for 3 days straight, running on coffee and spite. Foundation first, then roof. Then we work our way through every system, electrical, plumbing, HVAC. We winterize what we can. The detail work happens next summer. That's 18 months minimum. I know. He studied my face. You're really doing this. I'm really doing this. We worked through that first winter like people possessed. When the temperature dropped to 10 below zero in January, we kept going. Caleb and I wore so many layers we could barely move, our hands wrapped in work gloves over liner gloves, our faces masked against the wind that screamed down from the mountains. The material trucks couldn't always make it up the access road when ice made the grades impassable. On those days, we carried supplies ourselves. Oak beams that took 2 of us to lift. Bags of mortar that left our shoulders bruised. Copper piping in 100-foot coils that we rolled up the hill like Sisyphus with his stone. My hands, which had spent the last decade holding pencils and drafting beautiful preservation plans, became something else entirely. The skin cracked and bled from the mortar and the cold. Calluses built up in layers. My back ached from hauling wheelbarrows of debris. My architect's eye for beauty became secondary to my contractor's obsession with structural integrity. But we had help. Uncle Theodore, my mother's brother, who'd served 30 years in the Army Corps of Engineers, showed up one February morning with a thermos of soup and an envelope of cash. Don't tell your mother, he said gruffly, pressing $500 into my hand. She doesn't need to know everything. Uncle Theo, I can't. You can and you will. Consider it an investment. I've seen the plans. You're building something real here. He looked around the gutted interior, and I saw approval in his weathered face. Your mother raised you to be small, but you were never meant to fit in that little box. Miles came up on weekends, my 14-year-old son with his laptop and his wire strippers, mapping out the network infrastructure for what would eventually be a smart building. Mom, if we're doing this, we're doing it right, he said, sketching cable runs on my blueprints. Fiber optic backbone, mesh Wi-Fi, the whole system controlled from a central hub. Even Eliza helped, my 11-year-old daughter who showed up after school with her homework done, asking for sandpaper and wood stain. She spent hours on the grand staircase, working her way up each riser, turning scarred oak back into something beautiful. One evening in March, we sat around the temporary space heater in what would eventually be the lobby. Eliza looked up from the banister she'd been sanding, her hands dusty and tired. "Mom? This house is so big. Will Grandma get to come here when it's done?" I set down my coffee. Looked at my daughter's calloused palms, so small against the rough wood. "Only people who held sandpaper get to walk through the front door, sweetie. That's the rule." "End of it?" She thought about this, then nodded. "That seems fair." Spring brought possibility. The roof was sealed. The foundation was solid. Every window had been restored or replaced. The mechanical systems hummed to life: heat, water, electricity flowing through arteries we'd installed with our own hands. By summer, we had walls painted in historically accurate colors. Period light fixtures sourced from architectural salvage yards across 3 states. Furniture that mixed restored antiques with comfortable modern pieces. 18 suites, each named after local landmarks, each designed to make guests feel they'd stepped into a different era, while still having heated bathroom floors and high-speed internet. However, a year later, in May, exactly 18 months after I'd signed those papers, I stood on the completed wraparound porch with a glass of champagne that Caleb had brought to celebrate. The market appraisal had come back that morning, $4 million. I'd turned $1.2 million and 18 months of physical hell into something worth more than 3 times my investment. More importantly, I'd turned a ruin into a destination, a place people would drive 3 hours from Manhattan to experience. "You did it," Caleb said, touching his glass to mine. I looked out at the mountain view, at the gardens we'd planted, at the sign being installed at the gate, the Hawthorne Estate, a historic boutique hotel. "We did it," I corrected. Then, quieter. Without them. My body was exhausted in ways I'd never imagined possible. But my spirit? My spirit had never been stronger. By the time the soft opening arrived in May, I had transformed into a different woman. I'd invited local business owners, the Chamber of Commerce, and a food blogger from Albany who'd been covering Adirondack tourism. The response was overwhelming, every suite booked for the weekend. The dining room filled with guests exclaiming over the restored moldings and the seasonal menu we'd developed with a farm-to-table chef from Lake Placid. That's when Marjorie found the website. I didn't know she'd seen it until the complaints started. First, an anonymous tip to the health department about unsanitary kitchen conditions at an establishment I'd never named to my family. Then, 2 days later, a zoning complaint about illegal commercial use of residential property, despite our permits being public record. The health inspector arrived on a Friday afternoon, right in the middle of a tasting event for a corporate retreat group. He was apologetic but thorough, and I watched 20 potential clients exchange nervous glances as he checked refrigerator temperatures and examined our sanitization logs. I didn't panic. 18 months of building code battles had prepared me for this. "Would you like to see our permits?" I asked calmly, pulling out a binder that contained every inspection, every certification, every piece of documentation required by New York State for a commercial hospitality operation: food service permit, fire safety certification, AITA compliance report, occupancy permit, historic preservation variances. I'd memorized every code section, every requirement, because that's what preservation architects do. We speak the language of regulations fluently. The inspector flipped through page after page, his expression shifting from skeptical to impressed. He checked the commercial kitchen's ventilation system, the fire suppression equipment, the grease trap installation. He found nothing because there was nothing to find. "This is some of the most thorough documentation I've seen," he admitted, closing his folder. Whoever filed that complaint clearly didn't know what they were talking about. I walked him to the door, maintaining my professional demeanor even as satisfaction hummed through my veins. As we reached the porch, he paused, and something in his expression changed a flicker of respect, maybe, or pity. "Ma'am, I probably shouldn't tell you this, but..." He pulled out his phone, scrolled for a moment, then showed me the screen. "This is the complaint that came through our online system." The form was standard bureaucratic design, but 2 details jumped out immediately. First, the attached photo, a high-angle shot clearly taken from a drone, showing the estate from above. The kind of aerial photography Marjorie's oldest son, Callum, loved to post on his social media, always bragging about his new toys. Second, and more damning, the email address used to submit the anonymous complaint, marge_queenbee@email.com. I can't confirm who filed it, the inspector said carefully, but I thought you should know someone's going to a lot of effort to cause you problems. After he left, I stood in my office, a converted library with its original built-in shelves, and stared at that screenshot I'd taken. My sister had tried to sabotage me, had used an anonymous complaint system, probably thinking she was clever, not realizing that bureaucracy leaves paper trails. The old Virginia would have called her crying, would have asked why, would have tried to fix whatever imagined slight had prompted this attack. The new Virginia did something different. I had the screenshot printed and professionally framed a sleek black frame with museum-quality glass. Then I hung it on the wall in my office, right next to my architecture license and my LLC formation documents. Underneath the frame, I added a small brass plaque, Motivation for Success. Caleb saw it 2 days later and laughed so hard he had to sit down. You're really leaning into the villain era, aren't you? I'm not the villain, I said mildly. I'm just done being the victim. The zoning complaint died quietly once I submitted our permit history. The health department closed their investigation with a commendation for our facility standards. Bookings continued to roll in. But the real discovery came a few weeks later, entirely by accident. As the owner of a successful business with significant real estate assets, I'd been invited to join the VIP banking program at our local branch. It came with perks, priority service, a dedicated account manager, access to commercial lending products. What I hadn't expected was the casual conversation that happened during my quarterly review. How's the hotel performing? My banker, Tom, asked. We've been seeing great things in the local business community. Better than projected, I said, pulling up our occupancy rates on my tablet. That's fantastic. You know, it's nice to see someone in your family doing well. He caught himself, looking embarrassed. I'm sorry. That was inappropriate. I looked up sharply. What do you mean? He shifted uncomfortably. I shouldn't have said anything. Client confidentiality and all that. Tom. I kept my voice level, but something in my expression must have conveyed the importance. What do you mean about my family? He sighed, then lowered his voice. Your brother-in-law applied for a consolidation loan last month. We had to decline. His credit. Well, let's just say he's maxed out every card, and his debt-to-income ratio is concerning. My mind raced. Everett Devereaux, investment banker, always in his tailored suits, and his leased BMW. The man who'd convinced my mother he was wealthy enough to take care of her precious Marjorie forever. How concerning? I asked quietly. Tom hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. Delinquency. Level 3. Multiple accounts in collections. The kind of situation where asset seizure becomes probable. I'm telling you this because I've seen what happens when families don't communicate about financial trouble. It gets ugly. I sat back in my chair, processing this. My sister's husband was drowning in debt. The golf clubs, the designer clothes, the luxury lifestyle, all of it was a facade built on maxed-out credit. And they had no idea I knew. Thank you, Tom, I said. I appreciate your discretion. That night, I sat on my private balcony, the one attached to the owner's suite I'd kept for myself in the estate's east wing. I thought about Marjorie's Instagram stories, her carefully curated life, her expensive dresses, and her family estate that was actually mortgaged to the hilt, if my suspicions were correct. I thought about my mother, who'd chosen financial security over maternal love, who'd picked the daughter with the successful husband over the daughter with calloused hands and architectural talent. And I thought about the framed email on my office wall, my sister's careless cruelty preserved behind glass. I didn't call to gloat. I didn't share what I'd learned. I simply filed the information away, a chess piece I might need later. Patience, I'd learned over 18 months of restoration work, was its own kind of power. That power came to fruition when the Hawthorne Estate's grand opening in June exceeded every projection. We were booked solid through the whole summer, and the features in regional magazines had led to corporate retreat inquiries from companies in Boston and New York City. The revenue stream I'd projected conservatively had blown past my year-one targets by the summer. That's when my mother called. Virginia. Beatrice's voice was honey-sweet, the tone she used when she wanted something. I saw the article in Adirondack Life, The photos are just stunning. You must be so proud. I sat at my desk, looking at that framed email on the wall. Thank you, Mom. I was thinking Marjorie and Everett and I should come visit this weekend. I want to see what you've done with the place. We could stay in that presidential suite they mentioned. It would be wonderful publicity for you, having family there for the opening. There it was, the assumption that she was entitled to walk into the space I'd built with my own bleeding hands. That she deserved the best room in the house, the one that commanded $800 a night and was booked 3 months out. I'd love that, Mom, I said, my voice neutral and professional. But I've signed a management contract with investors. We have a strict blackout dates policy regarding relatives to avoid any conflicts of interest. The system has already locked out family member reservations for the first year. Silence. Then, what do you mean, locked out? Virginia, don't be ridiculous. It's not ridiculous. It's a standard business practice to maintain credibility with commercial clients. I'm sure you understand. I certainly do not understand. Her voice had shifted from sweet to sharp in an instant. That house has 18 rooms. It's massive. And you're telling me you can't squeeze your own mother into a corner somewhere? You were banned from the lake house because it was too cramped, and now you're being stingy when you have all this space? The lake house had 7 bedrooms. My childhood room had been turned into a storage closet not because of space constraints, but because I didn't matter enough to keep it. I let the silence stretch for a moment. Then, articulating every word with surgical precision, "You're absolutely right, Mom. My house is huge. 18 suites, 50 acres, absolutely enormous. But unfortunately, it's also perfectly full when it comes to you." I hung up before she could respond. My hands were shaking, but not from fear or anxiety. From the sheer adrenaline of finally saying what I'd needed to say for 42 years. I'd built something they couldn't take from me, and I was allowed to decide who entered it. The fallback happened within hours. Marjorie posted a vague status on Facebook. Interesting how money changes people. Some of us remember where we came from, and some of us abandon family the moment we get a little success. Stay humble, everyone. The post got 73 likes from people who didn't know the full story. My mother's friends, Marjorie's country club acquaintances. People who saw a successful woman and assumed she'd gotten too big for her britches. Then Caleb commented, and the tide shifted. "Strange," he wrote. "During the last 18 months when Virginia was carrying oak beams up a mountain in a blizzard, I didn't see any of you coming to help. When she was working 90-hour weeks to meet inspection deadlines, where was the family support? Now you want to show up and enjoy it for free? That's not how sweat equity works." The response was immediate. People started asking questions. Uncle Theodore weighed in with his own comment about how he'd watched me rebuild that estate with my own 2 hands and the determination of someone who'd been underestimated her whole life. Miles posted a photo of his blistered hands from stringing cable, captioned simply, "Built, not given." Within 6 hours, Marjorie had deleted the post. But screenshots lived forever, and several people had sent them to me. I saved them in a folder labeled Receipts, right next to the health department complaint. The pushback didn't stop there. My mother called again, this time in tears. "How could you embarrass your sister like that, letting people attack her online?" "I didn't let anyone do anything, Mom." Caleb spoke the truth. "If Marjorie didn't want people to know she wasn't there during the building process, she shouldn't have publicly accused me of abandoning family." "You're being cruel, Virginia." "No," I said calmly. "I'm being fair. There's a difference." The conversation ended with my mother's usual tactic, the dramatic hang-up, the expectation that I'd call back apologizing. I didn't. I turned off my phone and went downstairs to help prep for the evening dinner service, where a group of executives from a pharmaceutical company were celebrating a successful quarter. Later that night, I sat in the great hall after the guests had retired, a glass of wine in hand. The fire crackled in the massive stone fireplace we'd restored, the flames casting dancing shadows on walls I'd personally stripped and repainted. Caleb found me there, dropping into the leather chair across from mine. "You okay?" "Better than okay," I said honestly. "For the first time in my life, I'm not trying to fit into spaces that were never meant for me." He raised his beer bottle in a mock toast. "To building your own space." "To building it without them," I corrected. We sat in comfortable silence, 2 people who'd created something real through months of back-breaking work. Outside, the mountain air was crisp with early autumn, and the estate's exterior lights illuminated the grounds I'd landscaped. Everything I could see from this window, I'd built. And they couldn't take it from me. The leaves turned to gold and then to rust as the final week of September settled over the mountains. The estate was running smoothly enough that I could occasionally take a day off, which is how I ended up at my distant cousin Rebecca's wedding at a vineyard 40 minutes south. The venue was beautiful in that rustic, carefully curated way: string lights over wine barrels, mason jars full of wildflowers, a barn converted into a reception hall. I'd arrived alone, my kids back at the estate helping our weekend manager with a corporate retreat. That's when I saw them. Marjorie and Everett, dressed to the nines in clothes that were noticeably last season. Her Gucci bag was from 2 years ago. His suit, while tailored, was showing wear at the cuffs. They looked successful to the casual observer, but I'd spent enough time reading fabric and quality to see the cracks. My mother stood with them, her arm linked through Marjorie's, the picture of familial solidarity. They hadn't noticed me yet. I was planning to avoid them entirely when Marjorie spotted me during the cocktail hour. She crossed the lawn with purposeful strides, Everett trailing behind her, and I watched several heads turn to observe what was clearly going to be a family moment. Virginia. Marjorie's smile was sharp. What a surprise to see you. I thought you'd be too busy with your little hotel project. It's running smoothly, I said neutrally. The management team is excellent. How convenient. She sipped her champagne, her eyes calculating. Actually, I'm glad I ran into you. I wanted to ask a favor. Callum's 16th birthday is next month, and I'd love to host his party at your estate. It would be perfect, all that space, the beautiful grounds. Consider it a gift from his aunt. Every eye within 20 feet was on us. The other guests had gone quiet, sensing drama. I'd be happy to host Callum's party, I said evenly. Our private event rate requires a 100% deposit 2 weeks in advance. I can have my event coordinator send you the contract on Monday. Marjorie waved a hand dismissively. Oh, don't worry about the paperwork. I already had my assistant email your office the payment authorization form yesterday with Everett's card details. Just put it through. We're family after all. She smiled, thinking she'd trapped me. If I refused now, after she claimed she'd already sent payment, I'd look petty. Everett stepped forward, his hand on Marjorie's arm, reinforcing the play. He pulled a heavy metal American Express Platinum card from his wallet and slapped it on the cocktail table between us. The satisfying thunk of metal on wood was clearly meant to be impressive. Or just swipe it now if you're worried. Whatever the rate is, we'll pay. Don't embarrass the family by acting cheap. The card sat between us, gleaming in the October sunlight. Everyone was watching now. My mother, my aunts and uncles, Rebecca's family, half the wedding party. I looked at the card, looked at Everett's confident face, looked at Marjorie's smug expression. Then I spoke, my voice carrying across the suddenly quiet lawn. Everett, I appreciate the gesture, but I can't accept payment from that card. His confidence wavered slightly. What do you mean? It's an Amex Platinum. It has no limit. Actually, I said calmly. When my assistant ran the authorization details Marjorie sent over to check validity in May, the error code came back as transaction declined, card confiscated, delinquency, level 3. You're not just over your limit. The bank has issued an asset seizure order. I legally cannot accept payment from a dead account. The silence was absolute. Everett's face went from confident to pale, in the space of a heartbeat. That's not. You can't. I'm sorry, I continued, and I genuinely meant it in that moment. Not sorry for exposing him, but sorry that it had come to this. If you'd like to book an event, I'd need certified funds, a cashier's check, or wire transfer. But given your current credit status, I understand if that's not possible right now. Marjorie was staring at her husband, confusion turning to horror as she processed what I'd just revealed. Everett? What is she talking about? He snatched the card from the table, his hands shaking. This is Virginia. You had no right. I had every right to verify a payment method submitted to my business, I said quietly. I'm sorry you're going through financial difficulties. Truly. But I can't extend credit under these circumstances. Everett grabbed Marjorie's arm and practically dragged her away from the crowd, her protests fading as they disappeared toward the parking lot. I watched them go, that metal Amex card still clutched in his fist, a symbol of wealth that had been hollow all along. My mother stood frozen 10 feet away, her champagne glass halfway to her lips. Around us, the whispers started quiet at first, then building. The myth of Everett Devereaux, successful investment banker, had just shattered in front of 40 witnesses. I picked up my own glass of wine and took a slow sip, feeling the weight of 3 generations of family dynamics shifting beneath my feet. Uncle Theodore materialized at my elbow. "That was brutal," he said quietly. "She forced my hand," I replied. I would have happily sent the contract quietly if she hadn't tried to corner me. "I know." He squeezed my shoulder. "Your grandmother would have been proud. She never liked pretense." The wedding continued, though I noticed several people giving me a wide berth, as if financial honesty might be contagious. My mother left early without saying goodbye. I stayed for the ceremony, watched Rebecca marry her high school sweetheart, and felt something loosen in my chest. I'd spent my whole life trying to fit into their narrative, the struggling daughter, the disappointing sister, the one who needed their charity and approval. I'd built something better than all of them combined, and when they'd tried to take it for free, I'd simply stated the facts. The truth wasn't cruel. It just felt that way to people who'd built their lives on lies. I drove home as the sun set over the mountains, the Hawthorne Estates lights visible from the access road, welcoming me back to the space I'd created. My space. My rules. Built without them. The silence didn't last long. The foreclosure notice appeared in the public records exactly 32 days after the wedding. I wasn't looking for it. I'd stopped checking on my family's finances after the wedding incident, but Uncle Theodore called to let me know. "The lake house," he said simply. "Bank took possession yesterday. Beatrice has 30 days to vacate." I sat at my desk, that framed email still hanging on the wall beside me, and felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not vindication, not even pity. Just a flat calm, like the surface of the lake on a windless morning. "Where will she go?" I asked, because that was the expected question. She called Marjorie first. Apparently, Marjorie and Everett are moving into a rental, a 2-bedroom apartment in Plattsburgh. No room for a third person. He paused. "She hasn't called you yet?" "No." "She will." He was right. The call came that evening, while I was reviewing next month's booking calendar with my events coordinator. My mother's number flashed on my screen. I let it ring 4 times before answering. "Virginia." Her voice was small, trembling in a way I'd never heard before. "I need to talk to you about something important." "I'm listening." "The bank has taken the lake house. I have to be out by the end of November and I don't have anywhere to go. Marjorie's new place is too small, and I thought maybe—" "You thought maybe I'd have room," I finished. I looked out my office window at the estate grounds, at the gardens Eliza had helped plant, at the stone pathways Caleb had laid by hand. I thought about the sandpaper rule, about who had earned the right to walk through these doors. "Mom, the apartments on the south side are offering move-in specials right now. Very reasonable rates for seniors. I can text you the property management company's number." Silence. Then quietly, "You're really going to do this? Leave your own mother homeless?" "You're not homeless. You have options. They're just not the options you wanted." I kept my voice level, professional. "I have to go. I'm in a meeting." I hung up before she could respond, before the old guilt could creep back in. Then I turned off my phone and finished my work. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not from regret, but from a restless energy that finally drove me out of bed at midnight. I pulled on a sweater and walked out onto the great porch, the one that wrapped around the entire front of the estate. The air was cold and sharp, carrying the scent of wood smoke from the fireplace still burning in the guest lounge. The mountain range stretched out before me, dark shapes against a star-filled sky. Somewhere out there, maybe 20 miles north, the lake house sat empty, a for sale sign probably already planted in the yard. I'd spent my childhood in that house, always trying to make myself small enough to fit into the spaces they allowed me. Always hoping that if I was good enough, quiet enough, useful enough, they'd finally see me as worthy of love. They never did, but I'd stopped trying to fit into their spaces. I'd built my own instead, and it was bigger and better than anything they'd ever given me. Movement caught my eye. Miles was crossing the lawn with Hayes, Marjorie's youngest, the 12-year-old with the shy smile who'd shown up 3 weeks ago asking if he could earn some money helping with yard work. My son was leading the way toward the main lodge, both of them hauling a heavy sled stacked high with split firewood to restock the porch racks for the morning. Hayes had been coming every weekend since the wedding, never mentioning his parents, just showing up with work gloves and a willingness to learn. Last week, he'd helped Caleb repair the dock. The week before, he'd spent 4 hours helping our housekeeper strip and remake beds. He was learning the sandpaper rule without anyone having to explain it to him. "Mom?" Eliza's voice came from the doorway behind me. "Can't sleep?" "Just thinking," I said, holding out my arm. She came and tucked herself against my side, even though at 11 she was getting too big for it. "About Grandma?" "A little. Miles said she's mad because you won't let her live here." I looked down at my daughter's face, so earnest in the porch light. "What do you think about that?" She considered carefully, the way she approached everything. I think she wasn't there when we needed her. Like when she missed my birthday because Aunt Marjorie's car was more important. Or when you were building this place and she never came to help." "That's true. So it seems fair that she can't come now." Eliza looked up at me. "Is that mean?" "It feels a little mean." "It's not mean to have boundaries, sweetheart. It's not mean to say that people earn their place in your life." She nodded slowly, then brightened. "Hayes told me his mom is really sad. But he said he likes coming here because it's the first place where people cared if he worked hard instead of just what his dad's job was." My throat tightened. "Yeah?" "Yeah," he said. When his dad lost all his money, his friends stopped inviting him to stuff. But here, nobody cares about that. They just care if he shows up and does the work." I hugged her closer, watching Miles and Hayes stack the last of the birch logs onto the rack, their breath puffing in the freezing air. My nephew, learning that value came from what you built with your own hands, not what you inherited or what your last name implied. Caleb appeared from around the corner of the building, a cold beer in each hand. He held one out to me. "Thought you might be out here. Can't hide anything from you." "Nah. I just know that look you get when you're processing something big." He settled into one of the Adirondack chairs, and Eliza went back inside to finish her homework. "Theo told me about the foreclosure." "Yeah. How do you feel about it?" I thought about that question, really thought about it. How did I feel watching my childhood home get taken by the bank? Watching my mother lose the space she'd valued more than her relationship with me? "Relieved," I said finally. "Is that terrible?" "No, it's honest." We sat in silence for a while, drinking our beers and watching the stars wheel overhead. In the distance, Miles and Hayes finished with the wood and headed toward the equipment shed, their laughter carrying on the night air. "We did it," Caleb said quietly. I looked at the estate, every window glowing with warm light, every guest room occupied, every system running smoothly because we'd built it right the first time. I thought about the revenue statements that showed we'd exceeded our first-year projections by 40%, about the corporate clients already booking retreats for next year, about the couple from Boston who'd gotten engaged on our dock last week and wanted to have their wedding here next fall. I thought about my kids, who'd learned that success came from work, not from playing small and hoping powerful people would protect you. About Uncle Theodore, who'd seen me for who I was all along. About Hayes, finding his way to a place where effort mattered more than appearances. And I thought about that dusty Ford F-150 still parked in the garage, a reminder of where I'd started sitting in that truck with my hands aching, watching my sister turn my childhood into a storage closet. "Yes, Caleb," I said, raising my beer to the mountain view, to the empire I'd built with bleeding hands and stubborn determination. We built it, and we did it without them. The night was cold and clear, and for the first time in 42 years, I fit perfectly into the space I occupied, because I'd made it myself.